Hey everyone, how's it going? In this video, I'm going to be going on a rambling streak, talking about the accursed backlog, the bane of all collectors that obtain consumer media. We've all done it multiple times at one point or another, buying that next game that we wanted the moment that it goes on sale or whatever type of media that you yourself collect. As for me, I've collected both games and books over the years. I've collected quite a few things, in fact. I have some novels that I have not touched since I bought them while I was in high school. I own games that I bought a decade ago, and still have not played them. But in between what I didn't play, I also played and read a lot of different things throughout the course of my adult life. It's only that now as I get older, I have a much better grasp on when to start and when to stop with certain things. And as the year is nearing its end, I've been doing a number of quick playthroughs on various titles of interest, mainly arcades or games with short stories, sandbox and roguelike games where I play them enough to the point where I can make a concrete decision about whether it's worth continuing with them or not. Earlier in the month, I had this sudden desire to start going through the library that I already had, where hundreds upon hundreds of paid games were waiting there for me. It's an incredibly daunting moment where you see your list, realizing just how far you've let it go, making the list pile up to the same size as the dinosaur's mountain of poop from Jurassic Park. And all of this is my fault. After all, I bought and paid for the games that I wanted to buy because at the time I believed I would play them. The hardest part though about, buying a game is whether you're actually in the mood to play that game in the first place. I've had many occasions where I would purchase something only to just not play it at all. And again, I bought this not necessarily because of the immediate desire to play it, but because I didn't want to miss out on the sale at the time. Whatever site you use, you sometimes can't say no to a good deal, and that's usually where the worst cases of backlogs start to occur. I've taken chunks at the list before, playing some to completion and dropping whatever I didn't like, but then I got out of that phase entirely due to, just gravitating towards other things and naturally just taking a break from, going through the backlog and going through life in general. However, with the balance that I now have with work and fitness and health, as well as keeping my social connections intact with people close to me, I can afford to grind out the backlog for much longer than usual whenever I want to make time for it, and then, perhaps take a short break whenever I need it in the future. There are videos on YouTube and people in the gaming community that have all different sorts of techniques about backlogging and going through it, combing through it, experimenting with different approaches, finding the most optimal progression of the backlog progression. But here's the thing, backlogs, contrary to what some people might claim or think, don't really have a beginning or an end to them. And the reason why is pretty simple. You'll eventually buy something that you genuinely want. There's always going to be something new. I myself set some guidelines in order to make a good amount of progress, all the while balancing that time for other important things that I need to attend to sometimes, as well as knowing that there's always going to be games in the pipeline that I'm going to be interested in obtaining in the future. For starters, I made it clear to myself that it was going to be impossible to go through the entire backlog, 100% of it, because one, new releases will come out and I will eventually get them, or I find a project of interest and decide to get it, or it could be that a game in the list just doesn't interest me in any way, shape, or form and I just decide to ignore it. The original plan when I first thought about this idea was to not buy anything until I've gone through the majority of my list. But all that did was put more pressure on me to play more games because I thought, okay, let's go through X amount of games and then I can finally purchase something. But since I never quantified how many games I would be going through exactly, I would naturally purchase something. And again, this is a completely natural thing for all of us to do, and there's no shame in it. The only condition that I made myself commit to when I did buy said game was that I would play it immediately as soon as I play it, so that way I don't fall into that habitual cycle of creating a massive backlog that just grows and grows over time like a living organism or something. With what games I do have, there are just a lot of them to play, and some of them, in retrospect, I've realized now that either A, they were never that fun to begin with, or B, I bought them on a whim because of the deep price cuts during a sale, and, I had that window shop mentality where it looked interesting and I realized, hey, I had the money for it, let's buy it. Which is why I replaced the idea with a new one. So like I said, If I do in fact buy myself a new game, and I have, I play that one straight away so that I can continue with what other games I already have, and that I don't put the new game on the shelf collecting digital dust. You buy it, you play it. It's as simple as that. In a perfect world, we would never have a backlog, but it's just not how it works. Sometimes when we push ourselves to comb through the entire backlog, it can in itself feel like a job. So I thought I'd do a video providing some tips that I personally found to be helpful and have helped kept me motivated to keep me going the whole time. Also, this will be the last video for what's left of the year, and I'm squeezing out what's left of my brain to provide a service to the gaming community by imparting some wisdom before we roll into 25. Okay, so here's the first tip. Number 1, go for playtime, not completion. People often get so fixated on the idea of completing a game from start to finish, and it could lead to frequent burnouts and habits to just return to comfort games, stuff that they've already played. But I would say that it depends on the games that you're playing in the first place. Story-based experiences you'll want to try and finish, of course, and it's something that I also do as well whenever I do try out a game with a story. But I don't always finish them, and it's usually either A, I've gotten bored with it, or B, I realized I wasn't that engaged with the story anyways. I'd say that you don't have to actually finish every game, and naturally you won't because not all of them are going to click with you, which is why the focus should instead be more towards playing it, giving the game some playtime, giving it a try and seeing it how it goes, regardless of whether you finish it or not. Each genre or type of game will vary in their requirements for playtime. RPGs in general are some of the biggest time commitments that you can find, and it's a genre where backloggers can struggle big time with. Like say if you finish a full playthrough of The Witcher 3 plus all of the DLC, you are going to feel pretty exhausted by the end of it, trust me. Sandbox experiences don't really have a start and finish usually, and don't often have the same problems as long-term RPGs do. Even though Minecraft does have an ending and you can actually finish the game, you can still play it for as long as you want and then come back to it after you've had your fill because of how much you can do in that game. Multiplayer games are somewhat similar too, because with those type of games, they can be played infinitely, and the only time you usually finish is when you've had your fill of it. As for roguelike games, they do have some of the longevity of RPGs, but for different reasons, and a lot of them do require a fair bit of time as well to really gauge what they're about, which is why I would suggest focusing on the playtime rather than just trying to complete it. So say if you try a new roguelike game, just go for a couple of runs and see how it feels, and if you've been having a blast with it, and you decide you just want to move on, then just put it aside and then try a different game. Now to be clear, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to finish the game, but think more about just putting time into the game rather than just trying to finish it. So think more about the journey of the game than the destination. That way, the game has at least been touched and you've made time for it. Games that have a story, I tend to put more time into because if I become invested, then that alone motivates me to work towards completing the story. How many hours should you play exactly? Well, there's no universal number here, and like I said, it really depends on the game. You're just going to have to go by your feeling and your enjoyment factor when you're playing said game. However, if it's a sandbox or a roguelike experience or a simulation or strat game, then take your time with them, and if you've decided that you've had your fill of the game for now, then put it into a category for games that you want to come back to if you've enjoyed it that much. I have multiple lists for all of my games, and I've separated all of the free games to make room for the paid ones. Some people may think that, if you play a game for a bit and then you put it aside, it doesn't count as a completion of the backlog if you don't, finish the game, but I disagree. Everyone's preferences are different, and not every game is going to be finish worthy. Another thing to add too is that there are also other circumstances that make it difficult to focus on one game for a long period of time. It could be external circumstances, it could be things like family with kids, long work hours, or other activities taking priority. Adding all of this up, it's all the more reason to not stress too much about trying to finish a game. Finishing a game should only come from the natural desire and the personal enjoyment of the experience, and not out of some extreme obligation to finish the backlog. If you just don't feel like finishing it, or you feel like you just want to move on, then that is your prerogative. You don't need to reach the end for every game to count as a finished game. It just needs to be tried out, played for as long as you feel like, and that's it. That's more than enough. For games with long hours, just slow the pace down a bit. Stretch out as much as you need to accommodate for more important things. Don't stress too much about rushing through those games. For shorter ones, you don't have to worry as much. But remember that just playing the game and seeing what it's like is more than enough to comb through the backlog. Because at the end of the day, it's all about making time for the games that you have not played, and not necessarily just about finishing them. Number 2, make categories for your backlog. For me, having lists is one of the most important things in order to keep my progress organized. I have a few lists on Steam that tell me what games are in those lists, and I have lists on other platforms too. Completed games and ones that I've played and tried are in their own respective lists. When I've played a game but haven't gone to completion with them, I'll put it into one of 2 lists. The first one is for games that I'll come back to playing again, meaning that I enjoyed them a lot and can see myself playing them again in the future, but for now, I want to move on through the backlog and try out new things and keep exploring the library that I have and see what else is there. If it's a story-based game, that I will finish it if I'm enjoying it, but for anything else, it'll be until I feel like playing something else. For the games that I don't like, I put them into a list for games that I will never play again. Like I said before, not every game is going to click, and when you realize that you're not having fun anymore, then it's best to put it down immediately and move on with your life. Organization is a big part of achieving goals. It reminds you of what you've done along the way and what you're still working towards. And every day I see the list I want to reduce get smaller while other lists get bigger. This is good because it means I'm reaching the goal I want to get to. If I didn't make any of these lists, then I would have to go through a gigantic and disorganized list of games that would make the task feel even more daunting and annoying to go through. Separating everything will do the opposite and give you a clearer path to where you want to go, and having past results is also in itself a guiding hand. When you finish a game, put it in a completed list. If you liked it but want to move on, put it in a list where you want to go back to it later. If it's shit, put it in the list of trash. Number 3, one single player and one multiplayer game at a time. With games, it's generally best to focus on one at a time ideally, because then you can fully immerse yourself in the experience rather than stretching your mind across multiple experiences at the same time. However, contrary to what I just said, there is a trick to having multiple games at the same time, and it's in the separation of single player and multiplayer experiences. And how do you do this? Well, for starters, you look at 2 games and you make sure that they're not in the same kind of category. Say for instance, you're going through a game's story at the moment. Well, there's actually room for some multiplayer gaming too, if for something that you've wanted to try out. The benefit of multiplayer gaming in general is their pick up and play nature. Even with something like Counter-Strike, anyone can pick it up and play it regardless of their skill level. And also, the attention required for story immersion is generally non-existent in a multiplayer experience, so you can save some of that brain matter for your Baldur's Gate 3 campaign run while putting some time aside for that new multiplayer game that your mates told you to buy, knowing that after a week or 2 they'll never play it again. As an added bonus, sandbox or survival games work in a similar way if you approach them from a role-playing angle. For example, I decided to try a game called Necess, which from my experience seemed like a combination of Terraria, Stardew Valley, and Minecraft blended together. But to make the experience more unique, I wanted to go for hardcore runs so that every action I commit to has more meaning to it. In between the time I spend on that game and when I take breaks from it, I can also rush to another small game like say Super Buff HD, a short and quick boomer shooter that's weird but also fun, and when I want to break from that, I can return to Necess and continue with my character. And for multiplayer stuff, it might be a game that I'm already playing or something entirely new, but either way, I'm making progress, and that's what we're looking for here. But I'm doing it in a way where I can tackle multiple games at once, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily overwhelming myself with juggling multiple stories or multiple things going on at once. I'm just hopping from one thing to another, knowing that they're completely different, that require different things. Now, having multiple single-player story games is doable, but it will also depend on how short or long they are. I would personally recommend keeping it to just one if it's a long game like, say, Baldur's Gate or just any CRPG game in general. So, have one single-player or one multiplayer game going on in the pipeline. That way you're hastening your goal, but without the side effects of having to juggle multiple stories at the same time and forgetting things too often. And if you're playing a roguelike or sandbox game on top, then that's even better because that's 3 games, 3 completely different type of games that you can tackle simultaneously. With roguelike games, I generally just pick them up and play whenever, try a few runs and then take a break from them. Same as with sandbox games and multiplayer games, and when I'm done with the current ones that I'm playing, then I rotate them with new ones and then repeat this cycle. And all of this is in tangent with reducing the list that I'm working towards. Number 4, play what you actually want to play. Now, this might sound counterintuitive and perhaps contradictory because you might think, well, what if you just end up playing something you've already played? Well, that's completely fine. And why is that? Because at the end of the day, games are meant to be something to enjoy, and while it's great going through the games that we've never touched before, we may not always be in the right headspace for it. Another important thing to note too is that our selection has no beginning or end. So there's always going to be a case of buying that one game that we wanted on a sale, or that we decide to replay a game that we love. It's completely okay to go back to something you enjoy, and sometimes it's something you'll actually need. Trust me, it's not worth going out of your way to try out something new for the sake of doing it, especially when you're not in the mood for it to begin with. I'm not in the mood for horror games right now, but that's okay because I have plenty of other titles that I'm more interested in playing, and by the time my list of games gets shortened through playing other experiences, those horror games will still be there, and there'll be less games in that selection to pick from. So in that situation, I will be more inclined to try out those horror games that I haven't touched yet. And generally speaking, your experiences will be infinitely more enjoyable when you're in the right mood for that game. So if I'm not in the mood for a hardcore WoW run or Iron Man RuneScape, the experience is lessened by merely forcing myself to do those things, and it will just be a miserable experience if I do them while not being in the mood. So when this happens, I just think about what I'm actually in the mood for and just do that instead. What you can also do to circumvent this sort of issue is if it starts to become a problem where you're playing games that you like the most, like playing games that you've replayed a lot of, and you're not making time for stuff in your backlog, what you can do is find games in your list that are similar to that experience. So if you have a game that is similar to that game you love, try that game out for a bit because your mood will be naturally aligned to that experience because of the similarities between that game and the one that you like. So say for instance, if I wanted more RPG experiences, then I will comb through the list for more RPGs that I haven't played yet, and then we'll go towards them. And the thing too is your mood can shift naturally over time too. Maybe all of a sudden I want to play some quick boomer shooters instead of another RPG. So when that happens, I might shift to something like, say, Cyberfrag 69 or Super Buff HD. The first game that I mentioned is still incomplete, but it has some of the best weapon variety I've ever seen in a boomer shooter, and all of these weapons are a blast to use on top of the fast-paced movement. And it also has multiplayer as well, but you'll have to join the Discord to organize matches with players. Super Buff HD's quirky but MS Paint charm made it feel like a Flash game that evolved into an Unreal Engine title. Its skate mechanics and floaty gameplay can make for some fun freeform movement on top of the incredibly chaotic combat that ensues. The point here is that I'm not forcing myself to try out games that I'm not in the mood for, even if it means combing through the backlog further. It's a very long-term goal, and honestly, the goal for me personally is just to go through as many as I can, because like I said, backlogs always grow. They have no beginning or end, so play what you feel like playing, because if you decide to do the opposite, then it's going to feel like work and the point of playing a game's lost. Now, if you don't have anything that is similar to the game that you're in the mood for, then there is another way to fix this. You have the option of taking a break for a bit, and perhaps just go towards making time for other activities, or even consume different media. Sometimes, different experiences and media with other tones or themes can naturally shift your mood, and before you know it, you're suddenly in the mood for horror games or an epic fantasy adventure. So sometimes the trick is to not play games in order to be in the mood for other games. This is a trick that has helped me get out of a certain mood without brute forcing myself to go through a game that I just do not have any desire to play right now. So all in all, play what you feel, not what you feel. And that's all I have to share for the moment. It's been one hell of a year, and the past few months have been the most productive months that I've had in a long time. I'm excited for the new year, and I have a lot of things planned in the pipeline, but I'm going to keep those cards close to my chest. However, before I go, I'll give a few more quick tips to help you out here. If it's free, it doesn't matter. The goal here is to go for the stuff that we paid for, the stuff that we regret not playing because of the price tag. Free games do not have this issue at all. In fact, you can get as many of them as you want. Just put them all into a separate category and focus on what you've bought and want to make time for. Another tip, go and touch grass. Your existence is not tied to your backlog, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not super important if you never finish the backlog. In order to have healthy and stable progress with this goal, you need to balance out your life with other things too. Make time for friends, family, go on dates, go to the gym, pick up new hobbies, go on a mewing streak or something. The backlog is just a goal, nothing more. It's not the end of the world. No one's going to press the nuclear button if you don't finish 90% of your backlog by the end of this year. And the final tip here is that you do not need to finish the game. I have touched upon this already, but I wanted to emphasize this point again, and that there is absolutely no obligation in the world to finish the game that you're playing. It has never existed, and it never will exist. As long as you're having fun, that's all that really matters. Finishing the game that you're playing is a bonus, not a requirement. If you finish it, then it should come, as I said, out of the desire to finish it and not out of an obligation to finish it. I've played Fallout, Oblivion, and Skyrim many times throughout my life, but I've never finished every single playthrough I've made because I was having fun doing other shit with those characters in those games. I just play them for as long as I want and then move on when I've had my fill, and you should do the same with any game that you touch. At the end of the day, backlogs are just games waiting to be played. There's stuff that we wanted at one point but never ended up playing, but as we get older, more important things start to materialize and the priorities begin to shift. So while finishing the backlog is a great goal to have, it's not the only goal to reach in our lives. And like a lot of goals, they can take a lifetime, and backlogs are no different. There are always new games, new experiences waiting for us. Just remember that if you buy the game, you should play it immediately. Don't make the same mistakes I and a lot of people have and just buy to own it. If you gave it the time of day to buy, then you have the time of day to play. Anyway, that's all I have for this year. Thank you so much everyone for coming to the channel and hearing what I have had to say. And thank you for supporting me throughout the year. I will be back in 25 firing all cylinders, but I hope that everyone here has a great Christmas and a happy new year. Thanks for watching.